Hey, hi. Hey, how are you? I'm sorry, my voice is a little whacked out. I just want to talk a little bit how I became a strong believer in Jesus Christ. I was raised Catholic. I always had a sense of God, but as I got older, I really didn't want to follow because I knew that means you had to change. I was a sports fanatic, especially baseball. I was trying to go pro, the whole 9 yards. I was a very good player, but you meet some of these elite players, and they're on this other level, and it's amazing to watch. Some of these people, even people get to the minor leagues are fantastic players in truth. Somebody who's hitting 250 in the major leagues is an incredible player in truth. But you're talking such few people do it. But when I didn't make it, basically I went into partying because nothing was soothing my soul. And I just wanted to party and do all that stuff. And I fell into that life. I wish I didn't, to a large degree. I wish I found Christ earlier, but I didn't. Everybody has their path. But I always held on to what my mom told me. The story about my grandmother. Um, my grandmother was a religious woman, and she was ill. She got sick in her 50s, and she had a stroke. And my mom stayed home basically from work and taking care of her and doing all that stuff as a young woman. And my grandmother was getting more frustrated because she's getting more sick. She was in her 50s then, and she was very ill. And one night in a fit of rage, she told my mother and her sister, my aunt, to get the crosses off the wall, take them off the wall. They didn't want to do it, but it was their mom, and they listened, and they did. They took the crosses off the wall, and about 2 hours later, my grandmother calls them in and says, put the crosses back up, put them back up, and they're obviously a little relieved, or not a little, they were a lot relieved, and they put the crosses back up, and time's going by, and then now nighttime's coming in, and my grandmother's getting very, sicker, a lot sicker, and she falls into a coma, and they're basically all gathering around her. My aunt, my mom, their granddad. It was in a very dark room, and they knew she was, this is back in the day stuff, And as they're around her in this very dark room, a huge light comes in the room. A huge light, the smell of roses comes in the room. And I didn't know. A pastor told me once that roses are the smell of the glory of God, which I didn't know. And so this light is in the room, lights up the room, and these roses are there. Lasts for a few minutes, and again, it's all dark. There's no roses in there, nothing like that, and it slowly goes away. The smell slowly goes away. The light slowly goes away, and my grandmother passed away maybe about an hour or two later. She passes on, and my mom, who was like a borderline agnostic back then, she was young. Went to college, and a lot of colleges try to, brainwash you to be agnostic or atheist and all that. So that changed my mother totally. And she became a woman that a lot of people came to for prayer, asked for prayer for themselves, for their families, and stuff like that. So I always held on to that. Even though I didn't want to follow the Bible, because I knew I was going to have to, change my life. It was kind of fun, fooling around with women. Looking forward to getting hammered. The usual stuff that everybody knows, clubbing, bars. And I didn't take life serious. I just didn't, because I had depression. I was with depression about not making it as a pro, because baseball was my thing at the time. And so my life just basically became very, very sad, very depressed. I then got very, very ill, extremely sick, near death. I had sepsis, and I was in the hospital. And ironically, just before I had this sepsis, I was reading a lot of Christian material, magazines, and I used to say, where are these churches? I never saw them. Like I said, I grew up like a lukewarm Catholic, basically. Respected God and things like that, but I didn't want to follow. Never an atheist, nothing like that. Um, but then when I got sick, and like I said, I'm reading these magazines, and I get massively ill, and then I meet a born-again Christian in the hospital, and she's telling me all this amazing stuff about encounters with God, and I said, I believe you. And she was surprised because a lot of people would doubt her. I mean, we're talking about things like her seeing angels and demons, and I was like, yeah, I believe it. And so I always held on to that, with my mom especially. And then when my life just like fell apart, I started really holding on to God. Then started reading the Bible, and things like that. Fell off again. It can happen. But God will take you back up. If you're crying out for him, He will come back to you. If you're going to be totally hateful of God and want anything to do with God, guess what? God will not want anything to do with you. And I watch a lot of those heaven and hell videos, and the hell videos are literally people are in hell and there's no sign of God. I mean, there's nothing. So it's all hate, all evil to the core. Because even though you could not be a believer in God and God and Jesus in this world, you may not be a believer, you still have God's presence in this world. So you still have the light, you still have, good food and all that. You can enjoy life. In hell, all these people with near-death experience said there's not a single moment of joy. All torment, no water, no food, hatred everywhere you look, and on, like truly horrible stuff. So I watch a lot of those videos, and keeps me grounded. Um, and it just, I'm not a, I admit I'm a sinner, I am, but I try to get better each time. And following the gospel is very important. As I mentioned in other videos, in my life at least, time's running out, so I know that. So you have to acknowledge certain things about life. A lot of people love to pretend they're just going to keep going and living, and no, you're not. You're going to die. People who are a lot younger than you, they are your replacements. You're going to be checking out, and the world will move on like nothing, the same way we move on when somebody else passes on. And, I read something that was very humbling, that they estimate over 110 billion people have passed away since the beginning of time. 110 billion, that's some statement, and so we're a very tiny percentage of people that are actually living compared to all the people that died. So, time's coming, obviously people don't know when, but it's good to acknowledge your death, it's good. It's scary, of course it's scary, but it's also good because you're lying to yourself otherwise. I had a relative that said, you can't live until you can accept your death. And there's truth in that, especially as you get older, sickness comes in and lose people you love and on, all that stuff. So, without Christ, life for me is nothing. Again, it doesn't mean I don't, sometimes I curse, I repent of it, not politically correct on things, so be it. But I really do try to love people more, even if I'm not going to be politically correct at times. Humble yourself a little more. Read the Bible. Christ wasn't politically correct all the time, that's for sure. A lot of people like to pretend he was a hippie, basically hanging out with you, permissive, whatever. Christ wasn't. Chased the money changed out of the temple, spoke of hell more than anybody else in the Bible. Even told his mother, mentioned about his mother and his family. He said, your mother's calling you. He goes, who are my mother and brothers and sisters? The ones who are doing the will of God. Those are my mother and brothers and sisters, So it's some statement to hear, So I just wanted to say that why I held on to Christ. It's definitely my mom's story of going from agnostic to a believer. It's because of her mother dying in a bed in a coma with a huge white light, then came in a dark room with the smell of roses. It changed her and other people there. So hold on, don't give up. It's good. It's wonderful to read the Bible. It's also good to hear other stories that back it up. Incredible things. Near-death experiences are good to watch. Heaven and hell videos are good to watch. Hell ones are extremely disturbing, but you know what? A lot of times fear straightens us out. A lot of people need fear in their lives to get their act together. And, I'm one of them. So just want to wish you a great one. Jesus Christ.